guess Cher said it best. If I could turn back time, I would go back and apologize to all of my students whenever I would make them do a compare and contrast. After reading the Core 6 book, Essential Strategies for Achieving Excellence with the Common Core, I had a huge aha moment. I got to chapter 2 and I read through it thinking I knew all there was to know about comparing and contrasting. And after reading that chapter, I realized I knew very little about comparing and contrasting. I was a science teacher who had the students compare and contrast things such as meiosis and mitosis, endoskeleton and exoskeleton, point source and non-point source pollution, and a host of other topics that they would have to look for the similarities and differences. I also remember the district having several literacy coaches. I did not take part in that training, but I remember hearing that the students' ability to compare and contrast is a very high yield strategy for improving their achievement. It was one of Marzano's high yield strategies. There were 9 of them that they covered. He's pretty famous for Classroom Instruction That Works, and even now in Mentor, he's famous because we're using the art and science of teaching and eye observation for teacher evaluations. But what I learned in doing the compare and contrast my way is that there are several pitfalls. And pitfall number 1, using the strategy after learning, I definitely was guilty of this. Pitfall 2 and 3, students rushing to compare and contrast without knowing the characteristics they're comparing and not knowing what they're looking for in the compare and contrast. I think perhaps I gave them the resources that had the content and then asked them to find similarities and differences, and it would be up to them to find the criteria or the characteristics. I did not help guide them through that. Pitfall number 4, not having an efficient way to visualize the similarities and differences. Venn diagrams. Who doesn't remember and like the Venn diagram? The overlapping part of the 2 circles, excellent place to put those similarities. But if you have 2 topics that share a lot of similarities, there's just not a whole lot of room to write there. Here's the graphic organizer I came across, and I thought this was great. There's topic or item 1 on the left, item 2 on the right. You have nice little area to write in on how they're similar, and then you deal with the differences underneath. This is just a typical 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, so you just have to imagine that the differences go down for the rest of the page. I thought this was great. I was very excited when I found it. Pitfall number 5, guilty again, treating the identification of the similarities and differences as the end of the comparison process. I think after that compare and contrast, we would then just move on to the next one. Okay then, if you don't want to fall into those pitfalls, what should you do? Well, in phase 1, you have the students work on a description of the 2 topics. All right, so you give them a nice little graphic organizer to help them, and you help set the clear criteria for them to focus. Well, here's an example of how you can get a good compare and contrast started using 2 very famous leaders. You would set the tone with something like this. As you describe Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, focus on what made each leader unique, the challenges each faced, and what each accomplished. So when you are giving them the description organizer, you've got Winston Churchill on the left of the table, Franklin Delano Roosevelt on the right, and then the criteria the students are to look up and then describe for each one are listed there in the middle. So you've guided them with the characteristics or the criteria you want them to use in their compare and contrast. The next phase is after they do their descriptions, they're to find the similarities and the differences. And instead of that type of organizer I found, the suggestion out of the Core 6 book is to use something called a top hat organizer. And if you look at it, it does look like a top hat. Up there in the top part of the hat, you've got topic 1 and topic 2, and that's where you would put those differences, and you'd line them up parallel to one another down through that graphic organizer in that space. And then down in the bottom, you would deal with the similarities together. Phase 3, after the actual compare and contrast, you can stretch your students' minds by helping them draw conclusions. Instead of stopping with the graphic organizer, you can get some good discussion starters going. For example, how are the two items more alike or more different? What is the most important difference? Is there any one thing that sets these two parts completely? And so on. You get the idea. Phase 4. This is what you're really working towards. Moving the students to independence, having them formulate their own criteria in describing the items, and then continuing on to determine the key similarities and differences, and then reflect on that learning. Well, I thank you for watching. I hope that you will not be guilty of falling into those pitfalls in your compare and contrast in your classrooms. Thanks for listening and have a great day.